On a deserted Georgia highway, Sheriff's Deputy Rick Grimes drives his police cruiser past overturned and damaged cars scattered blocking the road, making him stop. He gets out and takes a gas can out of the trunk. He walks past the remains of more wrecked and abandoned cars down a hill towards a gas station. Various corpses and garbage are spread across the gas station, where a handmade sign hanging reads, "No gas." Rick searches around when suddenly he hears something and ducks down behind a car. He catches a glimpse of the slippered feet of a little girl on the other side of the car as she picks up a teddy bear on the ground. He stands up and sees a little girl walking away, so he walks closer to her. Rick keeps calling to her until she turns around to face him. Her lips and right cheek have been torn away, exposing raw teeth and muscle. Rick's face falls as she starts walking towards him, growling. She approaches faster as he steps back, draws his Colt Python, and shoots her in the head. As her body falls to the floor, Rick lowers his gun. About 2 months prior, Rick and his partner and best friend, Shane Walsh, are eating hamburgers and fries inside their police cruiser. They joke about the differences between men and women. When the conversation turns to Rick's wife, Lori, he turns somber. He says that they've been fighting lately, and says that Lori accused him that morning of not caring about his family in front of their son, Carl. Suddenly, the cruiser's radio cracks to life, reporting a high-speed pursuit in progress involving 2 armed suspects. Rick and Shane dump their food and rush to the scene. When they arrive, they lay down a spike strip and meet up with their co-workers, Lambert Kendall and Leon Bassett.
As they all wait for the car, Leon muses about their chances of getting on a police chase reality show. Rick tells him to focus and worry about having a round in his gun chamber and the safety off.
At that moment, the car approaches, pursued by 2 more cruisers containing the Linden County Sheriff's Department officers. The car, with the suspects inside, speeds over the spike strip, shredding the tires. The driver loses control of the wheel, and the vehicle flips off the road, rolling several times before coming to a rough stop upside down in a field. Rick carefully approaches the overturned car. A man emerges from the vehicle and immediately starts shooting at the officers. Rick yells at him to drop his pistol, but the man shoots directly at Rick and hits him in the chest. Shane shoots the gunman, killing him as Rick falls to the ground. A second man emerges from the vehicle brandishing a shotgun, but is also shot to death. Rick is revealed to be okay and injured, having been wearing a bulletproof vest. He tells Shane to not tell Lori about what happened. Meanwhile, a third gunman, unnoticed by everyone, crawls out of the car and through the grass. The man fires his gun and hits Rick in the side, where his vest does not protect him. He falls to the ground bleeding as Shane shoots and kills the third man before rushing to Rick's aid. He begs for Rick to stay with him, screaming at Leon to call an ambulance, but Rick remains motionless. A while later, Shane delivers flowers to Rick in the hospital, but Rick isn't fully conscious while Shane starts talking to him. At an unknown time later, Rick awakens and responds to Shane's presence. He discovers that Shane is no longer there. The flowers have wilted and died. The beeping of the machines have stopped, as has the clock. The room is empty. Weak, dehydrated, and alone, Rick pulls himself out of bed and falls onto the floor. He calls out for a nurse to help him, but no one comes. Rick is able to get himself up, and he stumbles into the bathroom, drinking water directly from the tap, before he heads for the door. He opens the door and notices a gurney is blocking the entrance to his room. He pushes it aside and continues walking in the dark and disheveled hallway. The hallway's lights flicker and wires hang from the ceiling. He goes to the nurse's station and tries the phone, but it's dead. He finds a set of matches while also looking for anything else worth taking from behind the desk. Suddenly, a flickering light draws his attention, and through a doorway, Rick sees the ravaged body of a nurse missing most of her skin. A horrified Rick backs away from this. Continuing further down the hallway, he sees that the walls are covered in blood with numerous bullet holes. A double door leading into the cafeteria has been chained shut. A message scrawled across in black paint: "Don't open dead inside." A pair of gray, disheveled hands reach through the cracks and fiddle with a padlock and chains, moaning and groaning as more fingers start to reach through the cracks, growling. Terrified, Rick stumbles backwards. He tries the elevator, but it's dead, so he exits through a heavy door into a dark stairwell that reeks of rotting flesh. He chokes on the smell as he lumbers down the stairs, lighting matches until he finds the exit. A door opens to the back of the hospital into the loading bay. When Rick's eyes adjust to the bright sunlight, he sees hundreds of decayed, fly-covered bodies wrapped in sheets and arranged in rows and piles. He leaves the hospital and stumbles up a hill. There's a military helicopter, sandbags, and other signs of a military cordon, but everything has been abandoned. He wanders down the road in his hospital gown, spotting an overturned bicycle in a park. As he reaches for it, the badly decayed body of a mutilated woman, her legs and lips missing, turns and reaches for him, pathetically moaning and growling in. Startled, Rick falls off the bicycle, but regains himself a moment later, mounts the bike, and hastily rides away. Rick bikes over to his home to find the front door open and the house deserted. Sobbing on the floor, he calls out for Lori and Carl, questioning if any of this is real or if he's dreaming. He heads back outside the house and sits on the steps. He spots a man stumbling down the road and waves his hand to try and get his attention. As he is doing this, a young boy creeps up from behind and hits him with a shovel. The boy's father, Morgan Jones, approaches the stumbling man Rick was waving to and shoots him in the head. He then proceeds to walk towards Rick and points a revolver in his face, demanding to know why his side is bandaged, but Rick passes out before he can answer. Later that night, Rick wakes up with his arms and legs tied to a bed. The young boy, Duane, stands guard with a baseball bat. Morgan arrived and asks if he has been bit. Rick informs him that he has been shot, and that is why he is bandaged. Morgan releases him from his bonds, but warns him he will kill him if he tries anything. Rick recognizes the home that they are in as his neighbors, Fred and Cindy Drake's house. Rick then accuses Morgan of murder for shooting the man that Rick was waving to. But Morgan implores that the man was a walker. He expresses dismay over firing that gun as it draws more of them out. He warns Rick not to open the covers he placed on the window, as the walkers outside will see the light and be drawn to the house. While they eat dinner, Morgan realizes Rick is unaware as to what has happened, so he informs him as to what happened. During Rick's time in a coma, the recently deceased suddenly began reanimating and proceeded to devour innocent people while turning others into walkers like them through bites. Eventually, this resulted in a worldwide societal collapse where the walkers are now dominant. Morgan tells Rick about what happens if a walker bites you, stating that the resulting fever will burn you out before you then die and reanimate as a walker. Morgan states he saw it happen, but refuses to answer who he saw it happen to. A car alarm suddenly goes off, and Duane turns off the lights in the house as Rick and Morgan peer out to the street through heavy covered windows and boarded-up doors. The street is filled with walkers drawn by the noise of the alarm. When a woman wearing a nightgown appears and walks up to the front door of the house, Duane runs away crying. Morgan comforts his son while Rick stares at the woman through the peephole at the front door. The woman looks around and tries to turn the door handle, but eventually gives up and wanders away. Morgan remorsefully tells Rick that the walker was his wife, and when she died, he couldn't bring himself to killing her and so released her to allow her to roam the streets. The next morning, Rick walks outside in a face shield, carrying a baseball bat. Upon finding a nearby walker, Morgan tells Rick the only way to permanently kill one is to destroy its brain. Rick approaches the walker and swings the bat repeatedly at its head until it dies. He quickly becomes fatigued, most likely from his still healing gunshot wound. Back at Rick's house, he tells Morgan he thinks his wife and son are still alive. He explains he found empty drawers in the bedrooms and the family pictures and photo albums were gone. Morgan laughs at this, mentioning that his wife was doing the same thing when they evacuated. Duane suggests to Rick that they could be in Atlanta. Morgan explains that the government was telling people to head to a refugee center there with military protection and food before the broadcast stopped. He also explains that the CDC is rumored to be working on a cure. Rick, Morgan, and Duane head to the King County Sheriff's Department, where they luxuriate in hot showers thanks to a separate propane heating system. As they dress, Morgan tells Rick that his family were headed to Atlanta, but he and Duane never made it because they got stuck. After his wife got bit, and after she died, they just stayed hunkered down at the Drake's home. Afterward, Rick packs a duffel bag with guns and changes into his sheriff's uniform and hat. He hands Morgan a rifle and some ammunition. They head outside and start loading the weapons into the trunk of his cruiser. Rick prepares to set off for Atlanta, while Morgan says he'll follow in a few days. Once Duane has learned to shoot, Rick hands Morgan a walkie-talkie, and he tells him to turn it on every day at dawn to make contact. Before leaving, Morgan gives Rick a warning that sometimes the walkers can amass into a herd, which can prove dangerous if encountered unprepared. Rick then spots a reanimated Leon who claws at the chain-link fence separating them. Rick admits he didn't think much of the young officer. But he won't leave him like this. He shoots the reanimated Leon in the forehead with his revolver, putting him down. Then, he and Morgan drive away from the sheriff's department in opposite directions. Back at the Drake's house, Morgan is nailing the doors shut, while Duane covers the windows before dark. Morgan then heads up to the attic carrying the rifle Rick left him. He looks at old photo albums and pictures of his wife. He then props the rifle up and proceeds to snipe several walkers in the hope of drawing his reanimated wife out. However, when she emerges, Morgan breaks down and cannot bring himself to kill her. Rick returns to the park where he found the legless walker. He follows a blood trail for quite a distance to find her again, crawling helplessly. She reaches for him futilely. Rick apologizes to the walker for what has happened to her, and then remorsefully puts her down with a shot to the head. Later, en route to Atlanta on Highway 85, Rick sends out a broadcast on his cruiser's CB radio. In a camp outside the city, a group of survivors receives the transmission. A young blonde girl, Amy, runs to the CB, but can't get a reply. Shane, Lori, and Carl are among the survivors. However, they don't recognize Rick's voice over the garbled transmission. By the time Shane takes over the CB controls and introduces himself, Rick has left the emergency broadcast channel. Lori voices that she's been saying for a week that they should put signs up on the highway warning people away from the city, and volunteers to go on her own. But Dale and Shane argue that venturing out is too risky. Lori walks off and Shane goes after her. Inside her tent, Shane tells Lori that she needs to keep it together for Carl, who has lost so much already. Lori agrees and they kiss passionately, before Carl interrupts them, not seeing them kissing. Lori promises him she's not going anywhere and tells her son to go finish his chores. He runs off smiling. Back on the road, Rick's cruiser runs out of fuel, so he abandons his car on the highway and heads out on foot with a gas can and the duffel bag full of guns, making sure to grab the family photo he keeps above his rear view mirror and stashing it in his jacket pocket. He approaches a farmhouse looking for gas. He peeks in the window where he makes the grisly discovery that a couple had committed suicide with a shotgun. Their decaying bodies picked off by insects. Rick tries to locate the keys of the pickup truck parked in their driveway, but finds a horse on their property instead. He saddles up and rides the rest of the way to Atlanta with the bag of guns slung across his shoulder. When he arrives to Atlanta, he discovers that there is no safe zone like Morgan and Duane described. The entire city is laid abandoned, with the streets littered with dead bodies and abandoned military vehicles. Several walkers take notice of Rick and proceed to follow him. Suddenly, Rick catches the reflection of a helicopter passing by through a skyscraper. He speeds up the horse to try and follow it, but ends up running into a large herd of walkers. He fails to escape and topples off to the floor as the walkers start to devour the horse alive. While the walkers are distracted, he manages to scramble underneath an abandoned tank. Several walkers notice him and begin to reach out at him from the underneath the tank. Rick shoots several of them, but is quickly outnumbered by the walkers. With no other option, Rick almost shoots himself in the head, but stops when he notices an open hatch underneath the tank. He quickly climbs into it to escape the walkers. As he rests inside the tank, Rick takes the gun from an apparent dead soldier inside the tank, but the soldier suddenly wakes up. He is a walker. Rick quickly shoots the soldier in the head, but is then disoriented by the loud gunshot reverberating inside the tank. As he recollects himself, he notices his bag of guns on the street. He opens a hatch on the top of the tank, but is quickly noticed by several walkers, who begin climbing on top attempting to get inside. He shuts the hatch as walkers begin swarming the outside of the tank. Completely surrounded by walkers, Rick, unsure of what to do next, decides to attempt suicide again by placing his gun to his forehead, but before he can do it, he is interrupted by a voice that breaks over the CB radio in the tank. Hey, you dumbass, you in the tank. Cozy in there? The voice says. Rick looks up and slowly lowers the gun from his forehead in relief.